I'm an avid hiker, and when I can't make hour-long plus drives up the mountains, I enjoy nice hikes near my home. This particular hike near my home is 5 miles in many different directions, kinda like a Goosebumps book if you know what I mean. You can only see the trees and greenery on one hike, or a massive waterfall on another, follow the river on one, see the abandoned mines and whatnot. I decided to go to the waterfall this time. It was about 2.5 miles in. I sat and did some work, enjoying the solitude of it. When I was ready to leave, I looked around and saw a family. There was a father, mother and 3 kids. I packed my things and went to leave. Now, I'm a major people hater. I prefer to hike in areas where there are no people for miles. I choose to go a different way to the trailhead because I didn't want to run into this family again. I checked my map on my cell phone and then found a route that I could take back. It seemed isolating enough. I immediately noticed this trailhead was not man-made, but just probably what was left after some flooding. It was going upriver away from the waterfall, and I was so close to the river, all I had to do was walk out onto a bent tree and I could touch the water. It was a very thin trail, not big enough for people to walk side by side, and covered in thick roots. I enjoyed this. It was peaceful. When I was walking, I did pass some girls who had hammocks hooked up to read in about 20 feet to my right. After I hiked past this, I had nothing but the sound of the slow-moving river. That's until I heard the footsteps coming behind me. I didn't want to deal with people, so I stepped out onto the side where a tree hung over the river and waited for them to pass. It was that damn family from the waterfall. I could have sworn they went by in the complete opposite direction, but who cares? I waited a few minutes before I started walking again. I didn't want to run into them. Pretty soon, their voices disappeared into the distance. I was able to go back to enjoying the peace and beauty around me. I hiked for another 5 minutes or so when I had a turn on a sharp corner around a major bend in the river. That's when I saw it. This man. The father was standing there on the other side, crouched down like he was gonna scare me. I screamed and he laughed. I got really angry and I noticed his family was nowhere near us. I yelled, "What the hell's wrong with you?" Not bothering to control my anger, I was annoyed that I encountered another human and they had to be stupid to me. He wouldn't stop laughing. I realized that I was dealing with an idiot or a psychopath. I didn't want to deal with either, so I turned around and booked it. I could hear him behind me. He was following. He wasn't a very big man. He stood about 5'6", around 200 pounds, but he was keeping pace about 20 feet behind me. Let me tell you that this path is not for running. I nearly went sideways into the river sometimes, but this gave me a few ideas too. The routes I could handle mostly. I knew the terrain pretty well. As long as I focused on my quickly paced steps around the thick root system and kept my balance, I'd make it. I was running back towards the waterfall now, downriver, where surely there were people around. It was a straight shot. But then, I remembered the hammock girls. I remembered that they were slightly hidden, and if I gone round the corner quick, the guy wouldn't be able to see me because of the natural curves in the path. I sprinted on the trail and burst into the hammock girls area. I really quickly said what happened. "Man following me, help." And they hid me behind the lowest hammock. It took us maybe 5 or 8 seconds max to get set up, and the 3 of us watched this guy who ran past not too long after. I was safely hidden. I stayed with the girls for a few minutes just to be safe, explaining what happened, catching my breath, and then went back to the way I come from upriver. I did not want to see this guy again. I thought it was over. Sadly not. As I again hiked up trail on the river, my original remote path back to the trailhead, I tried to calm myself. I couldn't get my mind to stop thinking that I was being followed. I just tried to hurry and get out of there as quick as I could. I turned a sharp right at the boulder that the man was hiding behind before, and kept pushing through the rough trail. I decided to focus on the sound of the river that was to my left, because I couldn't get the sound of my heart out of my ears. Now the sound of my heart palpitations morphed into the sound of footsteps almost immediately. I realized I was being followed again. I looked back and guess who? It's that damn father again. I got mad as hell. I stopped and turned around. I yelled at him for following me. I told him to stop. I yelled profanities too. I threw a pine cone at him. He smiled a toothy grin and kept slowly walking towards me as it bounced off his shoulder. He wasn't fazed by the pine cone. He just kept smiling, as if I was an old friend. The thing is though, what this guy didn't know is that I'm an army combat veteran and a domestic abuse survivor. I have PTSD from both, and I have skills that many don't. Dude chose the wrong person to mess with. I had enough. I already hated people enough, but this guy was crossing the line way too much for me. I charged at him. I finally wiped that stupid look off his face. I was seeing red at this point. I will not be made to feel unsafe in the only place I can feel safe at. Screw this guy. Seriously, screw him. I ran directly at him and knocked him down with the full force of my body crashing into him. I screamed at him as I hit him blindly. I grabbed his hair and the waistband of the back of his pants and started dragging him to the end of the trowel. He was yelling at me this time. Every time he fought back, I gave him a swift kick. I gave him several explanations for why his behaviour was so stupid. And then, a kick pushed him into the river. I told him to go off in the water and not come back until I'm long gone. I turned in the other direction I'd been walking from and decided that I needed to take another detour just to get back safely. I knew there was a trailhead parallelish to the one that was on to my right, and I looked around for a clear place to climb up onto the steep hill. It was mostly granite and moss and ivy. I hadn't planned an impromptu rock climb that day, but whatever. I found a spot and started climbing until I got scared out of my wits again by three guys sitting in the middle of the hill. They were smoking weed and completely hidden. Once I caught my breath again, I asked if they heard me screaming and they said they did, but that they thought it had been covered. I rolled my eyes and told them to kick anybody down the hill that tried to follow me, and I continued. It took me a while to cover the 2.5 miles back to the trailhead that day, because I kept looking back, taking detours and hiking randomly, but when I did, I called the cops and alerted the park ranger about the guy. I didn't know any other details on that. The cop laughed and said, "Good for you," when I told him what I did. Honestly, I doubt they even did anything after. No, I haven't been back to that place since, sadly. When I was 18, I spent a lot of time in the coastal wilderness. My favourite spot was a set of waterfalls several miles from the nearest parking area. Most visitors just parked in the RV area and swam in the creek along the gravel road. In the 2 years I spent hiking there, I never saw anybody further than half a mile into the trail. Anyway, one Saturday, I took my girlfriend to see the waterfalls since she had never seen one in person before. We set off on the trail, and not even 15 minutes into the walk, she grabs my arm and quietly said she felt like she was being watched. She felt really scared. I assured her that everything was okay. The only other thing that I had to worry about while being out in the woods was a bear once. We continued, but she couldn't stop shaking the feeling of being watched. I figured she just wasn't used to being out in the open wilderness and was having trouble adjusting. A couple of hours later, we finally reached the end of the trail and had a picnic at the bottom of the falls. After we finished eating, she tried to check her phone for messages and started to panic when she realized we didn't have service. I explained to her that there was no self-service reception anywhere around for miles. I said that nobody was around for miles. We could enjoy the peace of it, but this of course made her panic. We started heading back almost immediately because she clearly was scared and not enjoying it. On the way back, I explained to her how many times I'd been out here on my own and never had any problems, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. So we're about a mile from the falls on the only trail around when we heard somebody call from behind. I then nearly had a heart attack as I turned to see a man walking behind us. He had a rifle over his shoulder, a heavy beard, and his hat was tipped low. "What can I do for you?" I asked him, trying to sound friendly. "You guys left your cell phone back at the falls," he said. I saw a slight grin behind his beard and looked at my girlfriend. "Oh, thanks for that." I extended my hand. He shook his head and told me that he didn't bring it. It was sitting up there. He said that we should follow him up there, and he's going to take care of us. It's too dangerous to go with just the two of us. We politely declined and made our way back down the trail as quickly as we could, with him following us on the trail several feet behind. He followed us all the way back to our car, and then she showed me her cell phone when I opened the door. I haven't been back to that trail since. Summer camp counselor here. I work every summer for a camp for 5 weeks. One time we're backpacking to the tallest peak in my state. At night, me and a co-worker and friend went on a night hike to get away from the kids. We eventually ended up about 1/4 of a mile away from everyone. We're laying down on a slope in a patch of grass to stargaze. As we're lying there, I heard a beautiful sound behind me. It's running water. I've never heard water running before and thought to myself, wow, this is beautiful. All I could imagine was crisp, clear water gracefully trickling by. I got in this image stuck in my head now. I had to go and find this. I needed to go and find this. Now behind us was just dense forest and brush, so it would have been hard to find at night, but it sounded so close to us. Me and my friend looked at each other without saying a word, and I knew he thought the exact same thing as me. I said to myself, let's wait 5 minutes and decide if we should go. It felt like a playful presence was trying to persuade us to go over there. I decided we should go check it out, and we stood up without saying a word to each other. It sort of happened. As we approached the sound, it became quieter and quieter. We stopped, not knowing if we wanted to continue. As we stood there, the noise of trickling water became louder and louder until it sounded like we were standing next to a river. I then said that we should maybe come back tomorrow to find it. We agreed to come back. When I made that decision, the sound of the creek vanished along with the urge to go. There was only silence. The presence I felt earlier suddenly became sinister. It just kind of felt dark. Kind of similar to knowing somebody's watching you. I felt this fear slowly creep on me. We walked back to the camp quickly without talking to one another. Once we got back, we started talking about what just happened. My friend had the exact same urge to go and find the creek. He also had the internal battle in fighting the urge to go and look for it. When we got back, it was like a trance had only been lifted, and we realised what had happened. We both could think clearer, like a fog had been lifted. The urge I felt didn't feel like it was my own mind anymore. It's hard to explain, like an urge to go to a place that wasn't my own. The next morning, we went back to the spot where we were to look for the creek. We eventually made it exactly where we were before, and we looked and couldn't find any signs of creeks, let alone water. I decided to also look on some maps, and there were no creeks or water nearby. I'm scared to imagine what would have happened if we followed the sound of water, due to the ominous presence we both felt. If I was by myself, I would have thought I was imagining it, but my friend too felt it, the urge, experienced everything that I did. I don't know what it was, but it was eerie to say the least. What's strange is that neither of us actually said anything to each other. That's once we heard the sound of the water, yet we both made the decision to go and look for it without asking each other, and neither of us questioned it, and we both heard it getting louder and louder. We both felt the sinister presence after, trying to lure us in. So one year, my friend invited me to stay up in the woods at this old campsite that he went to every year with his family. It was fun. We fished and went swimming and everything. And one night we had this little bonfire and we had marshmallows there and whatnot. You know, just camping stuff. But then, at 2 in the morning, somebody whistled the Hunger Games call. Me being an avid whistler, one of my few skills, whistled the return call. They did it again, and I did so. The campsite had maybe 40 people, and everyone was in their tents except for me and my friend, the whistler. So this went on for about 5 minutes. The whistles devolved into random notes and counter melodies until I got fed up and decided to find them. I stood up and walked into the forest barefoot. I had no flashlight. A total idiot. No, I didn't want to call out to them. That would be too easy. Instead, I slunk through the forest quietly, trying to hone in on their whistle. It took about 20 minutes before I realized that my friend was too far away from the campsite. It might not have been him. A couple of minutes later, I reached a clearing. There was a little cliff that ran down into the lake, and a couple of trees had fallen over. There were 3 kids just sitting out at the lake, looking onwards. I called to them, saying that I'd been looking for them and how fun whistling was, and who were they, but they didn't reply. They just sat there and stared at the lake. It was positively eerie. They didn't seem to hear me. I didn't get any closer to them. I didn't want to spook them and have the demon throw me over the cliff or something. As soon as I made it back to my campsite, there was no more whistling. In the morning I asked if anybody else had heard it, and everybody said no. I was camping with 2 college friends, way the hell out in the mountains of Trinity Country in far northern California. It wasn't an established campsite, just a nice spot many miles down a dirt road off the main highway, Route 299. It's largely isolated to begin with. There might not have been another soul for miles. This is a very rural and rugged area, and it's part of a region where a lot of weed is grown illegally, and this makes it dangerous at times. We got to this spot late in the day, a nice little clearing along a stream, and set up camp. We sat around the campfire after dark, shooting the stuff like usual. We're suddenly interrupted though when a large animal explodes out of the brush and seems to stop right at the circle of our fire. But then we didn't hear it leave, not even a twig crack. It was gone though. We searched around with our torches. It seemed unusual to all of us that an animal would arrive so loudly. We listened to it approach for several oh crap seconds, and then there was no more sound. One of my friends, who was somewhat of a local, said he thought it was a puma. It was unnerving to say the least. We laughed it off, drank beer, and eventually crashed out, with one friend and I in a large 2-person tent, and the other in a tiny single-person tent next to us. We fell asleep for a few hours then. Suddenly, out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, I wake up. There were footsteps outside the tent now. I don't know why, but I felt a very strong intuition not to call out my friends for help. Even though I was worried that my friend had been out, and maybe he was going to get attacked or something. Maybe I was overthinking, maybe he went out to pee or something. And then, the person walking called out, and I almost shat myself. It wasn't my friend, it was some random guy. He circled our tents for the next 5 minutes calling, "Hello? Hello?" He said it over and over again, in a scarily calm voice and measured one. Remember, this is in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. No one should be around. I then had this scary instinct that was to stay silent and wait for an attack, which I did. I had my knife in my hand. My friend in my tent slept through all of it. The weird guy left eventually with no sound, not a vehicle sound, anything, and dawn eventually arrived. The next day, the first thing I decided to do was ask my buddy in tent 2 whether he heard the dude walking around or not. He did. He heard the exact same thing as me. My other friend, who'd been asleep, was obviously confused, asking why I didn't wake him up and stuff. We were saying that this was creepy as hell, and the guy was moving around and speaking in a really weird vibe. Now this friend wasn't the type to get scared easily, but he seemed terrified. It creeped us out not knowing where he went or why he was here. I think the part that really creeps us out was, how the hell did he get this far out into the wilderness on his own? He obviously didn't have a vehicle or we would have heard it, and we didn't see anybody around for miles. I don't know, it's just creepy thinking of that. A couple of years ago, I was stressed out from college and big city life. I decided to spend a long weekend in the woods doing what my friends consider utter lunacy and us outdoorsy people consider Nirvana. Deep woods free camping in the winter, alone. While this sounds like the beginning of a missing persons report, if you're an experienced outdoorsman, it's pretty safe. I also take a secret pleasure in being the white trash warrior that my dad hoped I'd be. I always hated the feeling of claustrophobia that come with being female in the city, avoiding eye contact, not walking alone at night. You see, when you're a girl out alone in the woods, you're in charge. You're safe within the warm embrace of your own solitary freedom, or so I thought. I spent a few hours on the roads, the surroundings getting wider and wider as I drove. I parked in an allowed roadside ditch. I used a compass and a map. I eventually hiked until I was within a mile's reach or so of some good ice fishing. I was at least 4 miles from the road. I made an extremely discreet camp in a clearing, with just one little hole in the snow for my tiny tent and tiny campfire. After a couple beautiful days of hiking and relaxing around camp, I made the trek to finish fishing. Everything was in utter winter stillness. The air was crisp, and the only signs that I wasn't in a perfect vacuum were the twitterings of birds, but they were very distant, and you could hear some waterfalls that were half frozen. After about a mile or so of crunching along in the snow, I silently celebrated my compass skills when I come out at the exact same point I intended to. I punched a hole in the snow at the thin crust of the ice. I got my fishing on. My first catch come quickly. After spending weeks under a frozen surface, the fish come quickly. They're hungry. I was feeling oddly fatigued and jumpy, so I decided to just clean the fish here and now and take it straight back to camp to cook. I quickly realized that my fish preparation skills were rusty at best. I cursed my lack of preparation as I cut myself for the second time. Something in my peripheral senses was irritating me, but I was very set in my task, focusing on the motions in the slippery mess. Now the thing in my peripheral senses was growing more irritating, like the buzzing of a fly or the yammering of a sibling. I carved and hacked, but I sliced my hand freshly open as a fish slipped out of my hands and into the snow. Frustrated, I screamed out, "Can you stop with that whistling?" Silence resumed. Then, my heart stopped. Living in a college neighborhood, I'd grown so accustomed to white noise that I failed to recognize how grossly inappropriate this sound was in context. The silence weighed down on me as I broke into sweat. The only reason a human would be this deep in the woods would be to hunt. No other hunter would give themselves away like that. Also, if he was whistling for no reason, then why the hell didn't he react to me? Why didn't he yell back at me, apologize? No, there was nothing. Just total stillness of the woods. Silence as pure as it was before I spoke. For a brief second, I was unsure if I heard birds or something. I just decided the fish was a lost cause. I slung my gear over my shoulder and headed for camp. I trudged off into the woods, and about a quarter of a mile from camp, I saw a large mass protruding from the snow. It was broken, it's hard to describe, like a moth to a flame. I trudged up to what materialized into the closing distance as a moose kill, a really good moose kill, a clean shot through the unturned eye. It was staring at me and saying something, saying that something was imposing a sense of dread on me, but I couldn't translate. I ran. I ran as hard and fast as I could. In the snow, the woods, everything looks the same. I knew I was moving south. I knew I'd passed the camp on the east. I made for the road, eventually slowing down to a weary trudge, calming at the comfort of the sight of the woods clearing ahead of me to make way for the country road. I look down to my left and I see my car 50 yards or so down. I jogged to it and drove the lonely 15 miles to the first motel that I saw. At this point, I abandoned my belongings. Now, it was only when I was sitting up watching infomercials at night that it started to fall together. Why would the Park Service issue free camp passes for the same stretch of woods that they allow hunting? The moose defined everything in my rudimentary understanding of hunting. Even with the snow to cool it, decomposition starts quickly on an animal that big. You'd have time for a few pictures, but you want to have it dressed quickly. Why would you kill a moose 5 miles into the forest? How could you ever drag it back to the road? In the morning, in my sleep-deprived and paranoid state, I described everything I'd seen and thought I heard to a very confused park ranger. He seemed more angry about illegal hunting than any of what I was saying. He said that he wanted to come pick me up and have me show him everything. I said I was only going if he brought a gun. He sided with exploration and told me to meet him. We rode out into the woods on an ATV, with me awkwardly riding on the back as if I was on the back of the world's awkwardest motorcycle. We get to a large impression in the snow where the moose had been. Blood was everywhere. There was also a distinct track mark of carcass being dragged. The drag marks made a smooth trail in the snow as if the carcass were on a tarp. The ranger said that he should take me back now. He asked me where my camp was. I pointed in the direction of the drag marks. It looked like he was finally sharing my unease. Back at the hotel, I washed my clothes in the sink and prepared to drive home for the morning. Then I received a call from an unknown number. It was a park ranger. The moose had been dragged to my campsite. He described the scene as a huge mess. He wasn't sure if it was an animal. It was not normal how messy this was. Somebody who cut into my tent with a knife. I asked about the rest of my belongings. He darkly said, "You don't want them back. They're covered in moose blood." So, what happens now? Well, we're gonna keep an eye out for this guy. I haven't heard or seen anything like this in my life before. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry that you had to see all of this. That was it. No closure, no explanation. In the years that have passed, I've tried every different application of reason. A hunter who needed help, but knew I was already gone. A deranged psychopath looking to make his second kill. I don't know.
Despite living out in the middle of nowhere on a 400-acre farm, we still have problems with someone coming into our house, moving stuff around, and occasionally taking something like trash bags or food. It started in early 2016. We would be laying in bed and hear stuff being moved around in the middle of night, but by the time we got up and about, there was no one there. Damage was done to our old front door after someone tried to get in. Several times we would come home to the front door hanging open. This behaviour isn't constant. It actually only happens once or twice every couple of months. Last month I heard a car door shut in the middle of the night, and when we checked, the lights were on the inside. Our motion detector lights outside tripped at all hours of the night. Well, I saw this person for the first time last night. It was only a glimpse, and they were wearing dark clothes. By the time my husband got out there, they were gone. I don't know where they go, but they always run. We hear them running sometimes, down the left of our house towards a field. There are woods beyond that. Okay, today I had my music playing over a speaker in the kitchen while I jump in the shower. Not 4 to 6 minutes after I got in, I heard my music suddenly shut off. I had a really bad feeling, but I also felt like I should just stay in the locked bathroom. I'm glad I did. My music had been paused, my phone moved completely, my front door was hanging open, and there was mud on my floor. I've always had an issue with anxiety, and I'm kind of a paranoid person anyway, so it's super hard for me to attempt to stay calm. My husband will be home soon and keeps texting me to make sure everything is okay, and I'm not stressing too bad, because it's not good for the baby. So creepy guy who's been stalking my house and doesn't like music, let's not meet again. I have an update. We went to the police station yesterday for the first time. They took our statements, said cameras were a good idea, and to call them if anything else happens. Thanks for the advice. We have replaced the front and back doors. We've installed a deadbolt. We have 2 dogs. My husband is getting cameras and our own guns, and I know how to properly use them now.
A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on the Great American Road Trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke as my mum had only been a long-haul truck driver. I suggested that we saved a ton of money by sleeping in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We brought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill, cutting up one of them to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we'd actually gotten so good at setting up camp that we could do so in about 10 minutes. Luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites and rest areas. Basically, anywhere that seemed semi-safe and legal. There was never a bad night. We always felt safe. That was until we went to Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule and would never drive more than 3 hours a day. No destination in mind really. We'd drive to places that we had found the night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers. We'd actually gotten very good at making friends upon all of this. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite. We went in the back of their pickup. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us how to line dance at a country bar. Played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm. Got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them. Spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us as their own. So basically, every encounter that we had was positive. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked, and 2 cars further up. We pulled up near the RV, and a man opened the door. Tev waved hello, and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she had said something, he just slowly closed the door and stared at us. We figured that maybe he just wanted some privacy, so we pulled further down the road and found a place that we could stop at and parked our car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while it is still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing. While doing so, Tez pointed out a campsite further down and we decided to give it a go. We'd met so many cool people in our previous 5 weeks by going up and just offering a beer or chatting. We wandered over. Near the campfire were 2 men, the owners of the cars we had seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking and we sat down and had a beer. While talking, the guy seemed pretty off. We come to find out that the 2 of them didn't actually know each other. The older man was definitely on drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs. However, he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former ranger for the park. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, family, etc. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him and he pulled out his camera to show our photos. It was very close to our campsite, and we were both a little freaked out. It was obvious we were scared by our facial expressions. The ranger laughed as he said this, and his expression also changed. It's hard to describe, but his voice was cold now. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should worry about." I was sure that he was only messing around with us. Yeah, He's gonna laugh soon, I thought, but he never did. I awkwardly laughed and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes, the ranger come back to it and was talking about something grabbing us in the middle of the night. No matter how we steered the conversation, it would always go back. The older man was high as a kite at this point and staring into the stars, not talking. We'd just laugh awkwardly or try and sip our beer and get a conversation to go somewhere else. The ranger then stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. It was pitch black out. I couldn't see anything outside of the circle of the fire. The beer cooler was just outside of that. Now suddenly, there's a red dot in the darkness. It took me a moment to realise that it's a camera. The ranger's now holding a camera. He's taking photos of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera light up. No, it wasn't entirely weird for people to take photos with us, but not of us. This is an entirely new thing, especially without asking or indicating that they're about to do so. So we're both staring at him like a deer in the headlights at this point. Instead of him realising what he's doing is weird, he just adjusts the camera and takes another photo, this time without the flash on, not asking us to smile or pose or anything. No explanation. After this photo, he comes back to the fire and sits down. Not a word said about the camera. At this point, we're both really scared. We make some BS excuse that we needed to go to our campsite and nope the hell out of there. We stand to leave. The UFO guy smiles and says, "Have a good night." Ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and says, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in these woods." Honestly, this made all of the hairs on my body stand on end. We then go towards our car. We rush over there, which we only found in the dark by the referencing of the RV. We jump in the front seats. My friend is hyperventilating. "Why do you take photos of us?" I was shaking and responded, "I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She then stares at me and locks the doors. She turns on the headlights, but I tell her not to, and she turns them off, because this is how he's going to know exactly where our car is. God knows why, but we didn't set up camp this night. Thank God we didn't. So all we had to do is put it into drive and floor it out of there. Just as we turn onto the dirt road, we can see the ranger in the rear view. He's staring at us with a really angry expression and cold look. We floored it out of there and luckily never saw him again.
So, over the past couple of years, I've shared this story at many a party, dinners, etc. And one of my friends recently told me about this subreddit and encouraged me to share it, so here it is. September 2010, my boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz, and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We'd had a fantastic time, staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We'd stopped in a B&B for the night, about half the way home, and were planning to get home by 6 PM. We all woke up early, about 4 or 5 maybe, ready to set off again, when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me, and I'd had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled it in, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone back from stone to dirt. Around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough my boyfriend pointed out in the front to a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to a cafe and car spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest and all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with CAF spray painted on the roof, a cavern, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up front. The sun was up, but no light or people were around. I guess they were still sleeping. It was about 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile, and I had a fumble through, looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be at least a decade-old mirror and suggested we take it and go, but me, being stupid sincere me, insisted we have to give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door, and at first looked pissed off and tired. Then he smiled to me a tutu smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, then, seeing the boys approach, asked what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought was fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down in the patio chairs, and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry and told me to come in, that women are the best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I don't want to come in. Ian muttered something, and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly, as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like how old we were, and where we were from, etc., and then became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both what we'd like to do to each other, how often we have intercourse, and weird, private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men meant to be fixing on the wing mirror, with his hand in the back window, grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off to the patio. Tony ran in after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car, and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying it must have felt. I got in the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came round the other side to get in, and told her some nails were on the floor. We looked over and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tyre, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts from. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and were ready to go, when Tony was the last to get in the car. He closed the backseat door. As we looked back, we saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, running towards us. My vision adjusted when we got a bit closer, and then I realised he was holding a rifle, a hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever, until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway, getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take the train instead. I'm still terrified I'll meet them again.
This takes place in October 1977, when my mum was 16. She ran away from her abusive home along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked all the way from Mass to California. Obviously this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mum's home life and past experiences, she didn't see any danger in running away from her past. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends in many truck drivers and other travellers. It wasn't until they reached California that this encounter happened. The Hillside Strangler, at first thought to be one assailant, ended up being 2 men who were caught and brought into justice for 10 murders. So my mum and Lisa ended up meeting these 2 guys who were super nice to them. They crashed at their place for a few days, partying. Nothing bad come out of it at this point. They told them that they're going to take them to the Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see the sights. Not being from the area, my mum had no idea that these were ridden with crime, especially considering that they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mum really wanted to see where all the movie stars lived, so eventually these guys take my mum and her friend to some dreary restaurant and bar and get them super drunk. It's also the first time my mum is introduced and tries coke. After these underage girls are now completely drunk and high, they split off into pairs and my mum's friend disappears with one of these guys. My mum is now hanging out with just one guy. Then he suggests that they stand on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night. He then says that a car's gonna pull up and she has to get into it and direct the driver across the street to this parking lot. It isn't really until the first and only car pulls up and gets in that she realizes that this guy is prostituting her out. Keep in mind, these guys have been nothing but kind and respectful to my mum and her friend these past few days. Sadly, this type of abuse isn't new to my mum. So she gets into the car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, he keeps driving straight. My mum explains that he's going the wrong way, so he started driving faster. My mum then moves towards the door, he locks it, hits her, and attempts to hold her down and drive at the same time. He tells her that she's not going anywhere. My mum knew in her head that she needed to get out of the car or she'd be dead, so in one swift move, she unlocks the door, tucks and rolls out of the car. His car screeches to a halt. She sees some bushes in front of her home. She runs and hides behind them. He turns the car around looking for her, creeping along the road. Where she's hiding in the bushes, she can see that he has a gun. As soon as the car crept by, she ran to the backyard. It was all fenced in. There was no other way out. She had to go back the way she come. By the time she crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw that his car had gone to the end of the road and was about to turn back. He then passes again, looking relatively in her direction. She's had enough now. She starts to edge out of the bushes to run, but she sees that he slams on his brakes. Confident that he's seen her now, she runs as fast as possible around the corner, but she could also hear the car, so she had to duck and hide behind some cars. As soon as he passes again, she booked it across the street, which took her to the parking lot. This was where they were originally supposed to meet at, and she sees her friend there. The creep did circle back again, but then she was with her friend, and they were leaving the area. My mum and her friend quickly ditched those two idiots, and did find a safer place to stay at. Shortly after this, my mum called back home and made it back safely. It wasn't until a long time later that she saw the two guys on the news and a story about a woman being murdered, and she recognized the murderer, dubbed the Hillside Strangler, as the man who picked her up that night. This happened about 2 years ago. It was the last and final private security gig that I've ever had. It also is what made me say screw it and join my dad up in the Pacific Northwest. So I worked out in Beverly Hills, California. I was a guard at a luxury community. The place was a creme de la creme. They had strict policies as far as security went. This still didn't stop the odd paparazzi or strange folk trying to get in, but more often than not, I would be able to cut them off. Now there was no less than 4 of us on patrol at any time. 2 at the guard shack watching the folks entering and 2 running a patrol cart. So one night, we're understaffed. It's just me and Big D. Big D was this huge guy who was a former bouncer and had been a bodyguard for some really famous people. He had to use the restroom, so he decided to go on patrol and run by the clubhouse to use the facility. So I'm chilling in the guard shack, which was actually a pretty nice little office where we had our phones hung up. Now, the only people that could call us were the residents or if somebody was calling from the clubhouse or the pool area. So I answer, and it's nothing but heavy breathing. I look to see who's calling. It's a clubhouse. I think it's D messing around. I tell him to stop this and hung up. A few minutes later, and I'm flipping through the manga. Phone rings again. Clubhouse. I answer it and tell D to finish and come over here quick. There's more heavy breathing and a raspy voice that says, "That's not nice, Nate." At this point I know that it's not D, because I see him coming back in the golf cart. I'm now petrified of whoever is calling. The voice then does a creepy giggle and hangs up. I then quickly stand up and go and tell Big D what had happened, how the guy knows my name. Now he thought that I was only messing around with him, because we often play jokes on each other, but he says that he's going to go check it out. I tell him that he better call our boss, but he rolls his eyes and tells me that he's going to come right back. Besides, he never got to use a restroom, so I go back into the shack and try and calm down. The phone rings again. I don't want to answer it, but I do. It's more heavy breathing. While this is happening, I see D return. He's as pale as a ghost. He tells us that he's in the restroom in the clubhouse and somebody comes in. And they literally just stand there and breathe really heavily. They get to the stall next to him, and as he's flushing, he looks up and some man's wearing a mask and covers his eyes and face and is just staring at him with this menacing grin. D quickly books us out of there. Our boss wrote it off as a teenager playing pranks on us and wouldn't call the cops for us either. He said it must have been a resident who knows my name as we do wear badges. I really wanted to quit that night, but the next weekend I'm at work and D is in the booth with me and we're both talking about the Lakers game when the phone rings. D answers and says it's for me. I take it thinking it would be best for me as I've answered before, and then there's nothing. I don't think too much of it, but then that horrible breathing starts again. I look at D and then the phone and I hang up. We told the other two guards to stay there and we take off to the clubhouse. We get there, it's quiet. We start going through the game room and the kitchen and we peek in both the bathrooms. Then we get radioed that one of the others saw a figure jumping over the wall. The walls are pretty high and it's creepy how whoever this is scaled it with no problem. We call the cops as we're supposed to if somebody gets in, and then we could sweep the area. Meanwhile, one of my co-workers finds a notebook outside of the clubhouse. It looks like it's fell out of somebody's pocket. It was one of those small lined notebooks with the pages that tear out. Inside was not only my full name, but written out the full name of every security officer that worked there and our home addresses. After learning this, I quit. I was making good money and I liked the co-workers, but this was just too much. Okay, for some background, I'm 24 from South Africa, and this occurred about 8 years ago. So the area that I live in is generally okay, but it's got its fair share of creeps and weird stuff in general. So my home is one home away from this really large park. It's really lackluster. Only a tall slide and a pair of swings, the rest is just open fields. So I was walking to the local spa, and in order to get there, I had to cross the park. Now, I was used to seeing shoes and other random stuff lying around, but this time is different. I found 3 whole pairs of clothes, just lying there, looked like Cell had gone through the place. That kind of rattled me. I was only about 16 then. I decided to hurry past this area. I was getting bad vibes from it. I suddenly felt somebody grab onto my arm though. I was shocked. I whipped around and faced a really tall man staring me right in the face with this angry expression. I wasn't really intimidated, as I'm quite hefty, but given the circumstances, my heart started beating quick. This guy started ranting on me about a whole bunch of nonsense, and trying not to piss him off. I just agreed with everything that he said. I can remember the smell of drunk on his breath. One thing that he said to me really stood out was that he was Moses reincarnated, and I should do some weird things with him later. Alright, this is getting creepy. I decided I had enough. I thanked the man for his advice and started walking away. Not running though, because I didn't want to trigger him. So I'm about 50 meters away from him, and he starts running, trying to tackle me down. He gets me to the ground and starts screaming into my ear, "Wake up, wake up," scratching at my arm with these really long nails that I'd failed to notice before. He starts trying to bite my throat. He then started to break down into tears about how I tried to kill him and how that he was soon to die, then saying that I killed him. I'm practically dying of fear at the overall oddity of the situation. Somebody sees what's going on and rushes over to get the man off of me. He doesn't even put up a fight, just lies there crying until the police come and pick him up. I'm not sure what happened to him, or why those clothes were there, or what could have happened to me. All I'm saying is that I'm glad I've never had to see him again since.
I wrote a couple of days ago about the creepy mime stalker. This is by no means the only creepy thing that has happened to me, and the more I thought about it today, the more I realised I have had over my fair share of scary encounters. Sooner or later, I'll add them all, but the one I'm writing about now is far away from the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend with a psychotic alcoholic father. She didn't live with him. He lived in a remote little coastal town. Now and again, we would go together to visit him and stay the night. My relationship with him was creepy in itself, but that isn't the subject now. One night, when we were visiting, my friend and her dad had a drunken blow-up, and he kicked us out of the house. It was about midnight. We had gotten a lift down, and didn't have a car. My friend's dad lived about 4 kilometers out of town, a huddle of 2 or 3 shops, by way of a dirt road. We started walking down the dirt road to the town, where there was a telephone booth. This was in the days before it was commonplace to have a mobile phone. I was going to call my folks, who lived about an hour and a half away, and see if they would come and get us. The whole way to town, my friend was drunkenly moaning and crying about her broken relationship with her father, and she hadn't let up by the time we got to the phone booth. She sat on the bench next to the phone while I woke my parents up. They agreed to come and get us, and I sat down on the bench for the long wait. Shortly after this, a van appeared and parked just behind the bench we were sitting on, maybe 5 meters away. There were 2 young men in the front seats, and they were looking at us. If that didn't make me nervous enough, the van door slid open, and I saw there were a number of young guys in the back. I don't remember how many, more than 2. The place where we were sitting was deserted. There were no houses nearby, just more road. No people, nowhere to run, no one driving by. It was a crappy middle of nowhere town. I stood up so I could see them better, and kept my eyes fixed on the van full of men, acutely aware of our vulnerability. What I saw was that they were looking back at us. They were talking amongst themselves, quietly at first. Then they started talking more and more loudly, and it became evident that they were deliberately talking loud enough for us to hear. They were talking about pulling us into the van and taking us somewhere to have intercourse with and murder us. I can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist of it. My whole body was not shaking, quaking with terror. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. I remember the face of one of them so clearly, I could draw it now. He was just sitting in the door of the van, looking at me with no expression, looking at me with dead eyes, looking at me like I was a thing. All this time, my drunk friend hadn't stopped sobbing to herself. Whether she knew the van was there or not, I couldn't say. I knew I had to tell her about the danger, but I was actually so full of terror I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. That was when the most incredible thing happened. My friend's father, who would never apologise to anyone in his life, who was the most awkward prick alive, appeared, drunk in his car. It's hard to describe how unlikely it was for him to do this. He could hold a grudge like no one you've ever met. He was such a stubborn guy. He and my friend had an emotional reunion. The whole time our eyes were fixed on the van. The men had stopped talking and were just watching us. "Let's go," I said. We got back in the car and started heading for my friend's dad's house. The van started up and began to follow us. I tried to explain to my friend's dad about the men, but he said, "I'll just slow down and they can pass." They slowed down to crawl behind us. Then they began to shout out the windows, screaming threats. They followed us all the way down that dirt road, and then all the way down the driveway of my friend's dad's house. They just sat in the van behind us, and we sat in the car, waiting to see what would happen. All of my dad's friends' neighbours were holiday homes, and no one was in that night. We knew that if a group of men decided to get out of the van and carry out their threats, we would get no help. After a very long time, the van backed out of the driveway and they left. My parents came in a panic to the house when they couldn't find us at the shops. My friend's dad hid in shame, and I went back to my family's house. I've been asked if I went to the police, but I can't remember. I don't think I did. It was a messed up time in my life. But that incident changed me forever, and I'm a very fearful person now, and very overprotective of my kids. And I don't want to change, because I'd rather be like this than accidentally trust one of those millions of psychos out there.
It was the summer of '97. I was 9 and scared of my own shadow, so this experience only furthered my fear of the world. My mum and I drove up from Revere and made to Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire. My dad was going to drive up the next morning to meet us because he had work. So everything was going normal at the campsite. We set up the tent, built our fire, and all was well. It was then that we noticed the lone, greasy-haired man in the campsite connected to ours, who was continually running and leaping onto a wooden post. He then attempted to balance himself on one foot. He kept on doing this, over and over and over again. It was odd, but we figured that he was just some lonely, cranky guy, and we had a good laugh at this. Now cut to the night time, It's absolute darkness if not for the campfire. My mom and I were sitting and roasting some marshmallows over the flames when we hear footsteps approaching from the other campsite. Out of the pines, the lone man stumbled onto our sight. He was ghastly and ragged in the firelight. I could tell my mum was tense. She asked the stranger what he needed. "Hey, I need your help in my campsite." We waited and didn't go on. My mum asked what help he needed, and the filthy man said, I locked the keys in my van. I need you to come over with me." He then looked at me and said, "Don't worry, kid. You stay here." I remember getting goosebumps at that. My mum said, "I don't know what you want, and I can't really help you." "You must have a spare hanger lying around somewhere," suggested the man. My mum didn't. The ghoulish man wouldn't let up. "Yeah, you must have a hanger here. Maybe you dropped one around the tent." My mum then told him that we did not have a coat hanger, and that my husband's going to be here soon. He can help you. He's a pretty strong guy. He then said, "Yeah, alright." The creep slurred his words a bit and struggled away into the darkness, but he returned again and said, "Well, if you find a hanger, come help me. I'll be here." And with that, the horrid man left. Now my mum and I barely slept that night. I felt her move at every sound outside of the tent. Looking back, my poor mum must have stayed up all night just worrying that a butcher knife was going to go through the wall of the tent. Nothing happened that night though. When we woke up the next morning, we could see that the lone man and his camper were gone. Later in the day, my mum explained, I ran over to her and watched as she picked up something from the ground beside our tent. She held it, staring at it, not speaking. It was a metal hanger. What's even more scary though is what's found out later. 4 dead females were found stuffed into metal barrels in Bear Brook State Park. I don't know if they're related, but God, it scares me thinking they might be even in the slightest. It's early November, cold, rainy, around midnight. My fiance and I are taking spontaneous late night drives. We typically start out on one of the main roads within our city and keep following it until we hit the next town. Sometimes our drives last for hours. The layout of my country and surrounding countries is a little bizarre. All of the cities and towns are isolated by large spreads of woods. I live in a relatively large college town, but half an hour in any direction can land you in the middle of nowhere on an unmarked gravel road. There's no villages around either, so it's pretty scary yet exciting. So it's midnight and we're nearly lost. My fiance Willa is on her phone trying to figure out where we are. We eventually find that we're on a mud path in a pit of country farmed by small towns that we've never heard of. There's no other cars on the road. It's rainy and misty, and the headlights on my car aren't doing a damn thing. There are strands of trees and bushes on either sides of the road. We're heading north. She then looks at her phone and tells me that we're going to cross 200 St. W, which runs into Reich Road, which is a straight shot to Wencar. So we continue our way down the mud road, but we never find it. Normally, we enjoy these drives and have fun, but this time, we're really on edge. Will says that we should have found 200 Street W already, and asked if we passed it without noticing. I asked nervously if we should turn around, but she doesn't think we can without backing into a ditch or tree. I'm driving a Mazda and it has an awfully wide turn. She's biting her nails as she's on Google Maps. 10 minutes past this, and we eventually see a little black road snaking up a hill, branching off the road we're on. I hurriedly turn into it. It's very narrow, and twigs and branches are raking the doors and windows of the car. We complete the hill climb. We're now in the middle of a clearing with a home at the end of it. We're in the middle of the woods now. Willa doesn't miss a beat and starts hissing for me to turn around. Our headlights illuminate the property in front and it's in total disrepair. Trash everywhere. Really nasty and old looking. Every inch of the property looks like it's come out of a horror film. Willa points out little moving shadows and glowing spots around the yard. There's lots of different cats there and they're all staring at us. Maybe somebody is there. I almost pissed myself when a walnut-sized rock darts out of the bushes and against the windshield. It fractures the glass. Willa screams and grabs my arm. She's whimpering, Dean, Denny, what is that? What's happening? The rain is pouring in the backstream, down the trees, over the house and across the pavement. Blood runs down my face now. After a few seconds, a man stumbles out from the bushes and weeds and he's carrying a shovel. He's swallowed in a big dirty navy coat and has a beard. The screen door to the home opens. All of the cats scatter. A tall, thin, spidery woman crawls out onto the porch. She has long, wild grey hair. She's just up high enough on the porch that the headlights don't reach her. She wipes her unusually dark hands on her skirt. I have no clue what's on her hands, but I remembered how absurd she looked. She stares at us now. Willa is screaming and crying and slapping to lock the doors. I panic a bit and slam the car into reverse, rolling over cinder blocks and branches, and then screeching back down the road. After Willa stops crying and there's some distance between us and the home, I start to relax. Yet, when we get out of the woods and hit a long stretch of straight road, I realise that a car's following us. It must be them. I get a horrible feeling now. We're then pursued for nearly an hour, until we finally reach Flory and pull into a gas station with a few other people there. I watch and the car passes. It's the same nasty Chevy truck that we saw at the home. They had stalked us all the way to the next town. We wait until the truck disappears, which is clearly looking for us, and we quickly ask for directions. On our way home, I look in the rearview mirror constantly, terrified that they're going to come back for us. We eventually make it back early in the morning. My teeth don't stop chattering until I fall asleep.
So, I've just been reminiscing with a friend about our trip to San Francisco 3 years ago and realised that this story belongs here. There were 3 of us, all 24 and female, in America for the first time. We went to a beer pong tournament organised by our hostel and headed to a bar afterwards with a bunch of people who grouped together. One guy seemed to know the area well and suggested we move on to another street which had a row of clubs on it. I forget the name now, but we'd met some guys the previous night who mentioned the same street, so it stuck in my head, thankfully. We ordered about 6 Ubers and everyone jumped in. A solo guy who tagged along with the group ended up sharing with us, as the 3 of us didn't want to split up. He spoke to the driver before we got in and waited for us to get in the back. He then proceeded, to our horror, to squeeze in the back seat with us. I don't know why the taxi driver let him do this. At this point, we laughed it off and told him to get in the front, but he said, "It's okay," and we started moving. After a while, I realised we were back by our hostel. This was weird, because I knew the area we were heading to was in the complete opposite direction. I asked the cab driver where we were going, and told him it should be on the X street. He said, that's not where he told me to go, and the creepy guy casually states that he was taking us back to his tent. We definitely did not want to go back to his tent. We told the driver this and asked him to take us where we wanted to go. Thankfully he complied. Even creepier, the guy laughs and says to the driver, "Think what we could do with these girls." At this point, we stopped laughing and are quite scared. It didn't help that he was squashed in the back seat with us and had an arm around my friend. He carried on making creepy jokes, and a few minutes before we pulled up, he went straight in and tried to kiss my friend. She kindly told him to F off, and thankfully we arrived, so jumped out. We had no idea where on this street the original group were heading, but luckily, a nice and normal guy we had been talking to was standing on the corner where we pulled up. He felt really bad when we told him and apologised for leaving us with him. The guy followed us to the next place and tried to talk to us again. He said he didn't understand why my friend was so angry and couldn't understand what we were saying. It's a strong accent. He eventually left. We dealt with the situation by doing what we do best and laughing about it. For the rest of the holiday, we called our hostel our tent. It's not until we look back that we realise what a dangerous situation we put ourselves into, and how worse it could have been if we'd gotten out of the cab in a strange place, or if we had an equally creepy driver.
Let me start by saying that all the women in my family are small and look younger than they are. My mum is 60 but looks 40. I'm 42 and look younger. My oldest daughter is 23. Now this story is about what happened when she was 13 but looks about 10 or 9. Now all this to say is that there is no way somebody would have looked at her and thought she was of legal age. So one day, my 3 kids are playing in the backyard. S, the oldest girl, was 13. B, younger girl, was 11, and G, my son, was 10. We lived in a very rural area, just a few houses in a row on both sides of the street. A few more scattered around, and the rest is farmland. There were 5 houses on my side that had an alley running between them, which dead ended behind the 5th house. It was a joint owned by the last 3 houses, and just ran behind the other 2 across from the road to our garages and parking spaces. There was one more other home on the alley, and past that there was only farmland. The 5 homes on my side were all owned by families who'd been there for a long time. Now my kids are playing in the alley all the time. Since only 3 families ever had any reason to be on it, they knew to be slow for the kids. One of these days, a man in a white pickup drove to our alley. My kids recognised him as one of the brothers who was renting the home behind us. They never really spoken to him, just seen him in that yard, so they knew he lived there. He asked S, and only S, if she wanted to ride in the truck with him. She said no. All 3 of the kids left the alley and entered our fenced backyard. He really didn't get any hint though, and he started begging with S to come over to him. He was sitting in his truck and wanted to get a hug off her. At this point, all 3 kids ran inside to tell me what was going on. By the time I looked out there, he was long gone, and my husband come back and sat on the porch with a shotgun. At this point, my borough only had 3 cops working a double wide trailer. They're all old and of retirement age, so a few years later our force was dissolved and come under the country jurisdiction. I later told the police what had happened, but they said since he wasn't a threat and didn't actually do anything and left, they didn't have the manpower to respond to every little call. No one ever come. I only found out much later when I discovered the child abuse database for our state and looked up my area. I then found out that both of the brothers were actually on this list. There was a small door that led to the attic space in my bedroom. When I was 11 years old to 13, and it became a habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a couple of times a week. I didn't think anything of it, just assumed that my mum didn't close it all the way and it became ajar and opened. After a while, I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night I have to close that attic door behind you. How about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hasn't been in the attic in months. I asked my brother. Nope. Asked my father. No again. So then, I started to pay really close attention to it, making sure it was shut in the morning, checking it after school, checking after dinner, and then heading up to bed. It was always open. After a couple of months of wondering, studying, and experimenting, I thought I'd see what happened if I didn't shut it. I opened the door before school and checked it after. Still open. Checked it after dinner. Still open. Before bed. Open. Now I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy with the door open across the room. I decided to check it, so I roll over and focus on the black space into the attic. I then see a face staring back at me. I bolt downstairs, wake my parents. My brother thinks I'm joking and tries to ridicule me. We then switch bedrooms. We move into a new home about 6 months later, due to expanding household. Now a new physics teacher and his wife bought the home. I could have forgotten about the event and chalked it up to me having an overactive mind, but then, in my senior year, I discovered how awesome my physics teacher was. At the end of the senior year, my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then, Took it to my old house to see what they've been doing with the place. We got a fun tour. I got to tell stories about the projects my dad and I did there. You could actually still see evidence of a few of these around the home. Then, the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I asked jokingly, "Notice anything strange in this room?" And her face goes blank. On camera, she asked me what I mean, and I try and shrug it off and end up saying something about the attic door. She then confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the door is open. She then tells me that on the second day of being there, their dog, a German Shepherd, had gone into the room but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, and then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof of the porch, and then started running away. The dog didn't return until the next day and hasn't stepped foot into the hallway since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had on film, but I decided that it'd be best just to let it be. I used to work doing maintenance on historical properties. There was a historical house museum I worked at, and it wasn't open to the public all the time. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor centre with offices, and then some houses about half a mile off a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew. Most of the time though, I was alone. So one winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to do some replacement work with electronics on the exterior of the home. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property. I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the home, and then one of the lights inside the home turned on. I freaked out, thinking that maybe somebody was messing around with me and playing a prank or something. So I radioed into the visitor centre on my walkie-talkie, and I confirmed then that I was the only person who was working that day, and obviously I hadn't left yet. I then found out that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran half a mile up to the office. I made my co-worker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got inside the home, the light turned off. The bulb was still warm, all the doors were still locked, and the circuit was still off. It still gives me shivers thinking of it to this day. There was a really creepy atmosphere for the whole rest of that night whenever you went into the room where the light was. I've never felt it since and don't want to feel it again. Around the time I was a sophomore in high school, my parents decided to tear down our old home and rebuild a new one. Seeing as a lot of people in our neighbourhood were doing the same for value purposes, I made lots of jokes about how cool it'd be to get a secret room that nobody knew about, but I didn't actually expect them to take adding it into consideration. Turns out, they worked with this contractor and ended up having an area set aside. Basically, if you look inside of my closet and turned right, you could walk to the corner where there was about a 1.5 foot bar to hang clothes on. If you moved them clothes, there was a wall behind that you could push open and bam, the hidden room, fully equipped with a ceiling light and electric plugs. Imagine how many games of hide and seek I won. No one ever found me. The room was well and truly my favourite secret. I wasn't going to tell anybody except for my family. Unfortunately, after a few months, I began getting tired of the room. First of all, trying to squeeze past all of the clothing proved to be a pain. Then, I'd have to slide through the tiny space to get into the room. The magic worn off. I stopped going in there. Fast forward a couple of months later, things began to get weird. Our family had left for vacation for 2 weeks, so we had one of our neighbours take care of the home. When I got back home, I was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed. I opened the door to my room, which was dark. I noticed something was off. I could see a faint glow coming from underneath the closet door. Okay. My neighbour must have been going through my stuff, so I walked to turn off the light, only to realise the closet light switch was facing down. Confused, I opened the door, and to my horror I noticed that, in the corner, all of my clothes had been shoved aside, the wall to my secret room has been pushed open, and the light was on. How could this be? Nobody knew it was there other than my parents and the contractor. I stood there in utter disbelief for about a minute until I realised my neighbour must have fully explored the place. I then warily made my way to go and turn off the light, followed by putting the wall door back in its place and moving the clothes back to their formation. I'm going to try and explain what happened as best I can. Still kind of freaked out, or at least confused, I started to exit my closet. I'm standing in its frame, looking across my room into the corner where I have an iron floor mirror. I'm looking at my reflection when I notice that the closet space behind me suddenly lights up and I hear the scraping sound, or at least I think it was. I'm not sure what the sound was. My heart starts pounding so hard that I can hear my blood rushing in my ears. I remember jerking my head back inside, realising that all of my clothes were moved aside, the wall was pushed open, and you guessed it, the light to the secret room was on. Now I was petrified. I convinced myself that I had been so confused where I initially went into the room that I had not really closed it all, but I knew I was lying. Throughout the next few months, things were getting weirder. Nothing major, but still weird to the point that I couldn't explain it. For example, I would walk into my bathroom only to find that my toilet seat was left up, every single time. I assumed my dad was coming into my room to use it, but that would have made a serious case of overreacting. When I approached him about it, he looked at me as though I were crazy and said why would he use my bathroom, he had his own one down the hall. I couldn't answer that either. There's other incidences where I'd wake up in the morning only to find that on multiple occasions my closet door was wide open. Now before any of you say it's not a big deal, let me clarify that I have been slightly terrified of my closet, and made sure every night that the door was closed so I could sleep. I would check to make sure I heard it click, pull it back and forth a few times to make sure it actually shut all the way. There was no reason it'd open. There was no explanation as to why the light was turned on in the middle of the night either. I know, malfunctioning lights and toilet seats don't come off as scary, but bear with me. I freaked out to the point that I finally approached my mum about it, and we were both in our downstairs office one day. Here's some backstory on her. She doesn't believe in ghosts whatsoever. In fact, she raised me and my brother to think that any person who believed in them was crazy. So when I tell her of my suspicions, I'm surprised when she sighs and when she says that she's noticed weird things happening too. She then continued to tell me that how when we first moved into the home, she would always hear footsteps walking around in my brother's room. This confused her because he was at school every time this happened, but she could have sworn that she'd hear him running around. She then told me that one time she walked up there, toys were sprawled across the carpet. This took her by surprise because he hadn't left his room like this before. She then goes on to explain that the previous owners of the home had a young girl that actually died in the brother's room, which is what led to them selling the home, which she never told me before. I'm guessing she thought I was old enough to know now and not form any irrational stories about ghosts haunting our home, if that had been her goal. I hate to inform her that it didn't work. At this point, I'm now positive that our home is haunted. She wrapped up her story and laughed it off as though it was silly to believe that there wasn't a logical explanation for what was happening. The footsteps coming from the old house was because it was old. The lights were just the lights. Not sure about the toilet though. Yeah, alright. At this point, we swivel around in the office chair and continue on our computers. After about a minute or so, I could hear this loud, almost white noise. I turned to my mum, thinking she was taking a break and watching some weird video, when I noticed she's looking at me with the same face. "It sounds like your shower's running," she said. Our dazed expression stemmed from the fact that my shower hadn't worked for a good month or so. Right as she said that, the water had stopped running, and things went silent. We then heard 5 loud footsteps, and I mean loud. I just remembered seeing my mum turn white and immediately bolting upstairs, past my dad who was sitting on the couch watching TV. I finally joined her, only to find out that she was looking in my closet, under my bed, everywhere. She had tried to explain to my dad what she heard, but he insisted it was piping issues. She doesn't really believe him though. I just stayed upstairs, accepting the fact that something really weird is going on. I was thinking about everything that happened. I realised that my current room is exactly where my brother's old room used to be. That would have been where that poor girl passed away. When I was in my uni, I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a home in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing could walk into places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would often go to, usually at about 12 AM to 3 AM because I'm a night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning, I decided I was hungry but didn't really have an easy to cook dinner, so I walked down to 7-Eleven to grab a bite. However, as soon as I opened my door, I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding, I was shaking, the works. Telling myself that this is ridiculous, I decided that I was just being silly and walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I become even more terrified with no reason for it. I couldn't understand it. It was so intense that I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Now the next day, I heard about a group of drunk guys who were causing havoc near the intersection at 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up somebody really badly. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced that something bad would have happened to me that night, and if I ignored my feeling, I could have got off really badly. "7 years ago, I lived in a 2-story farmhouse. It was built in 1908 and was very large and old. I was packing clothes and putting them into a small unused bedroom. I was wearing my MP3 player, and the last time I checked it, it showed 3/4 battery life. I was on my 4th or so trip with hauling a load of clothes to hangers. It occurred to me that my closet was empty too. Perfect, I'll just hang them back up in there, I thought. Now this closet was massive. It could have been a second room. It was really long and wide. It still smelled old, as if it was fresh from 100 years ago. I ducked fully inside. This is a weird place to be, I thought to myself. Suddenly, the music doubled in volume and changed to something that wasn't music. It was like, I don't even know, rapid nonsense, vast electronic babbling. It scared the life out of me. I flew straight out, looked at my MP3 player. It was dead. I'm a hunter and mountaineer. It was a chilly December morning. I hiked in, pre-dawn, taking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trails. I got to my nest about half an hour before the sunrise started to settle in. The wind kicked up and the fog rolled in. It was thicker than milk. Within a few minutes, my visibility was 5 feet, so I held tight, huddled against the freezing wind when I hear twigs snapping around me. This is for no apparent reason. Normally it means I can hunt something, but for some reason, it sent a frosty chill down my spine. I looked around for my lever action 30-30 as quietly as possible, and lay flat on my back tucked against a tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see a thing. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains. My visibility was starting to increase a bit. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind me or besides. I remembered laying there, rifle across my chest, thinking of how silly it was to react like such a coward. I rationed with myself that bears and mountain lions are readily available here. I had likely stumbled into a bunch of whitetail that had bunkered down here. I decided to sit up. The rustling then stopped immediately. It was fully dawn by now. I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey. I had assured myself that it was around me a few seconds ago. I looked. It wasn't. Nothing was. By now, the fog had faded away, and it was apparent to me that I was alone in the woods. I hunted all day without seeing so much as a squirrel. Around 3 in the morning, after fighting the wind and abnormally cold day, and not wanting to hike out by flashlight, I decided it is time to turn back. Now, walking through those woods was the most uneasy that I've ever felt. Lawfully, once you make it back to the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle. Not that day, which is normally a stroll through the woods. I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, stop and listen. I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. This continued for a while. I was about 100 feet away from my truck when I rounded the last corner and saw it. Hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, there was a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. Now, I'm giant, big outdoorsman, but this thing shook the life out of me. I quickly hurried back to my truck and never returned again. I still have no idea how it got there to this day. Stationed in Elgren, Germany between 1990 and 1993, but I lived off post in Nuremberg. I lived in a complex on Dusselburg, Stubbury, with my then wife and 2 daughters. My oldest daughter, 3 years old at the time, would often come running into our bedroom crying, complaining of a monkey in her room. Now, she didn't have any toys of monkeys or apes. I was kind of baffled at this, and I couldn't understand why she was so scared. Their bedroom and ours were across from each other between the hallway, and we could see directly into their bedroom from ours. So one night, I was sitting up in bed reading. I caught movement out to my right side. Thinking one of my kids may be up, I walked into their room, but they're both sound asleep. I go back to my bed and read my book again. I noticed more movement. I glanced over to their room where my bed is, and then I saw what appeared to be the outline of a child as it walked into the bedroom where my daughters were sleeping. I launched out of bed and covered the distance between my room and theirs in maybe 4 leaps. There was nothing. My daughters were both sleeping. In my childhood home, I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs in the early mornings. I didn't think too much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear my mum typing away. So one day I got up and called out to my mum, assuming that she was down there working as I could hear typing. There was no answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening on a regular basis. Now, I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I figured what I was hearing wasn't actually there. So I didn't mention to anyone what was happening, because I thought they'd think I was going insane. Now, this happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing, and I mean fast and furious clicking of the mouse, like somebody was going insane. So one morning, I was eating my breakfast when I heard my mum at the top of the stairs calling for me. "You're not down there on the computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she heard it too. She was convinced that she could hear typing, yet nobody was there. I told her about all the things that I had heard and all the times that I thought my sister was there. Then she opened up too about hearing it. No one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try and catch whatever it was causing this and discover a rational explanation for it. I sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anybody was on the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there, In an instant, it would stop. I think this went on for a couple of years, and I just kind of learnt to live with it. Now, I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the centre of the room began flashing very fast, almost like a strobe. It then exploded, glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when I did. I was scared for my life. If I hadn't have run, one of the shards would have hit me and cut me. Around that same time, I was on the computer at home by myself when something started happening, and it resulted in me never going in that room alone again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my shoulder. I've never ran so fast in my life, and hesitated in going to that place again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been spooky, but weird, not really scary. It still makes my heart race when I think about the sound I heard today. I've never had an encounter like it before or since then. I'm still too scared to go down there today. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's, but I called it my own because I never had one before. Now, Buster didn't like being hugged or cuddled at all. Not normally by little children especially, so he hated me. He would avoid me at every possible cost. He was also an outdoors cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in at night for food. So one night, Buster didn't come home. We usually fed him at night. I was worried. Our area was riddled with coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about his disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped on my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked by this. He'd never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me. I said how that he fell asleep with me and how happy he seemed. They then let me know that they both found him last night. He was found between an alley behind our home. They thought that he had been attacked by a coyote. He was long gone. It wasn't possible that he slept with me in my bed that night. About 5 months ago, I got home from work at about 10 PM. I had to enter the living room, and to do so, you have to walk past the basement stairs. I did so without actually looking straight down them, but I had a full vision of them. There was a huge brown head at the bottom of the stairs, opening and closing its mouth. I took about 5 steps past the stairs before it caught up with me, and then I was scared that it was a person in my basement. I called a friend of mine to come over. She did. We didn't find anything down there. All the doors were locked. Nothing had been moved. A few months later, I was watching TV upstairs before work. I heard a noise like something had been thrown across the room in the basement. I froze for a sec, looked around, and saw that all my pets were in the same room as me. I called my friend again, told her to stay on the line as I checked it out, so I reluctantly made my way over there. Nothing was moved. All the doors were locked. I've heard that noise. It sounds like somebody throwing something very large and heavy at the wall about 5 more times. I still haven't figured out what it is yet. I haven't seen the face since, but I always feel like somebody's watching me, especially when I'm in the kitchen, which is at the top of the stairs. I hope nothing escalates.